Greetings. I am Evie Litwack, the founder and director of Witness to Mass Incarceration. Witness is a digital library of interviews of formerly incarcerated women, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer people. Witness aims to place the LGBTQ people's experience at the center of the fight for alternatives to mass incarceration. LGBTQ people, particularly people of color and non-conforming gender, have doubled the population inside prison than they do outside. 16% of transgendered and gender non-conforming people have spent time in prison or jail, compared to 5% of all American adults. The LGBT community, particularly transgendered people of color and gender non-conforming people, face discrimination inside prison. Transgendered people of color face sexual violence, frequent harassment, and being placed in solitary confinement. The reentry community is wholly unprepared to serve the unique needs of the formerly incarcerated LGBT people. One of my goals is to ensure the public is aware of the discrimination of LGBTQ people, that what they face both inside and when they come home. There is a deep prejudice and discrimination against LGBTQ people, resulting in routine and disproportionate criminalization in the federal, state, county, military prisons and jails. I am delighted to have a panel of formerly incarcerated LGBTQ people. Zahara Green is a trans woman of color who was first incarcerated at the age of 16, left prison by 24, having spent 5 years of her incarceration in solitary confinement. Of course, she was put there under the guise that she was being protected. And while in solitary, she was raped by a fellow prisoner. Elizabeth Ramirez and 3 friends were babysitting her sister's children. The 4 lesbians ended up being accused of gang raping the 2 children. These women were stunned by the accusation. The media went wild, claiming cults and satanic rituals. Liz spent 17 years in prison. She and the other 3 women, the San Antonio 4, were recently exonerated. Ken Pekela is a former lieutenant colonel in the Army who was openly gay and HIV positive. He was charged for exposing a young lieutenant to HIV, though there was never proof of transmission. His was one of the last cases to be tried under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And I am so excited to have the 3 of you on as a panel.
Thanks, Evie.
I see you all. All right, we're going to start with, when did you first know that you were different? I'm going to ask, Zahara, you can start us off.
I first knew that I was different around the age of 6 or 7. I felt that I was I wanted to be a girl at that age. I remember being in the living room and on Christmas Day, and my mom separated all of our toys. And I remember wanting to play with my sister's toys the most. And I knew then that I was different.
And you, Liz?
For me, I think it was probably in high school. I was 16 years old when I realized that I was attracted to women.
Okay. And Ken?
Yeah, for me, it was high school. It was about the same age, 16. Things were just kind of turning on and realizing what my attraction was to.
So we're going to go right to our cases. And what I'm going to ask you is, to what extent did you, being LGBTQ, have on your either arrest or your charge? Liz, why don't you take this?
Well, for me, it was me and my 3 friends. And because of the charges that it was with children, the prosecutor had kind of painted a picture that we had sacrificed them like a cult, and to it was like an initiation to our lesbianism. And so they kind of inflamed the jury's mind. And my lifestyle was not supposed to be brought into the courtroom, but they did, and they used that. And so every chance the prosecutor had, he used that I was gay and this is what lesbians do. And she was sacrificing her nieces to her friends to initiate this lesbianism cult. So the satanic ritual is kind of what went, but not only that, but we're very conservative in San Antonio. So being gay was not something that they accepted.
So Liz, how much time did they give you? Well, how much time did it give you? You went to trial.
Yes, I went to trial, and it was like a week long. And in my sentencing, they gave me 37 and a half years.
Okay. Now, Zahara, you chose not to go to trial, and I'll let you explain the reason.
My arrest and conviction was out of a small county in Georgia, a rural area, and a predominant white area. And me, as the trans woman of color, I knew that it would not be in my best interest to go to trial because I feel that I would have been convicted on that reason alone, my being a trans woman.
Yeah. And Ken, you had a completely different situation than anybody.
Yeah, the military system is like no other for many of the states. My case was based solely on being gay and living with HIV openly, with no investigation whatsoever. Sent to trial and actually convicted, no evidence, nothing except a person making an accusation.
All right, so we're now going to go into conditions of confinement and what it was like for us, and we'll have a conversation. I know myself, I didn't get any medical care. I know that I spent time in solitary confinement, so we're going to talk a little bit about the conditions of confinement. And Zahara, I think you had the worst situation, being in solitary for 5 years.
Yes. I was sent to solitary confinement. They said that they were sending me there to protect me from other inmates in the prison. While I was in solitary confinement, I was in a one-man cell originally, and while I was there, I had situations where I had rats coming in my cell, and the food was so horrible that I was vomiting from the food, and I could not eat. I lost so much weight while I was incarcerated. The conditions were horrible.
And when you were in solitary for 5 years, and then they put you in general population. So describe how you met the man you met who would end up being in a cell with you in solitary.
When I first went in general population at the prison, it was my first time ever going to general population. So it was a new experience for me. And usually when I'm in a new environment, I'm very quiet and shy. And the guy approached me and said that he wanted to talk to me. He said to me that someone like me would need someone to protect me in a place like prison, and said that he would actually protect me. At the time, I did not think, well, maybe he'll want something in return. He followed me everywhere I went. And then one day he told me that I need to do what I need to do for him protecting me. And when I told him that I did not want to do anything or felt obligated to do anything, he grabbed me by my throat and threw me against the wall. I eventually told the prison officials what was going on. They sent me to protective custody. And when I arrived to my cell, he was in the cell already there. And that's when he actually raped me.
Liz, you didn't get too much medical care among one of the problems with being in prison. Did you tell us about that?
Well, for one, I have a thyroid deficiency, which I didn't know. I had a B12 deficiency, and I had gone to the to the medical, and they had told me that I was fine. They drew my blood, sent me back to work. I was working at a print shop for about 12 hours. I was always tired, and I didn't ever get enough rest. And so one night, I was going to bed, and it was almost count time, and I guess the nurse or the doctors called medical, and they told them they needed to rush me to the hospital. So they called the dorm. It was during count time, and they let me go. They escorted me to medical. They escorted me to an ambulance and took me straight to the emergency room. They gave me a blood transfusion. Of course, didn't let me tell my family or anybody that, what was going on. And I had 5 minutes to make my decision whether I wanted the transfusion or not. If I wasn't going to take the transfusion, then most likely I wasn't going to last. So unfortunately, I took the blood transfusion. They kept me there. They did a biopsy to make sure, trying to find out why I was losing so much blood. And if I would have gone to sleep, I probably wouldn't have woken up. So that was one situation. Then, of course, they gave me medication. I had a hyperthyroid. During that time, they gave me radiation treatment, and which lowered my thyroid and killed 60%, kept me on methimazole, which increased my heart rate, and almost had a heart attack. So they sent me to medical for an EKG, and then finally had to wean me off the medication because my heart rate was too high. So I had 2 instances, where I almost died.
Would you say it's due to bad medical care? Because most of us who are incarcerated deal with situations of bad medical care. Anyone want to chime in on that? Or what happens to us when we lose a family member?
Yeah, I'll chime in on both. There's my
Okay.
end. They actually took my HIV meds away from me for 5 days. This is not old science. It's a simple 1-a-day pill that keeps your viral load in check and undetectable. But they decided, because they didn't understand it yet, and I was so new to them, they would take my meds away for 5 days. And the fear there, of course, is you become resistant when you come off any medication, specifically the antiretrovirals. But sadly, that last piece was just the experience. I had one of our youngest cousins in the family who was killed while I was in Leavenworth. And the only way I found out about it was just a remote chance. There was a kid in Leavenworth with me who was from a town and happened to know my family. And I found out one morning going to breakfast, this kid ends up telling me, "Hey, don't you know the family name?" And it was that was terrible. I don't know if either one of you lost anybody while you were there, but just to be away for those common things. But a death that you can't see them, you can't mourn them. You come home, they're just not there. They're not there, but it's just it was devastating.
I think it's devastating to lose someone while you're incarcerated. I know that when there was a death in the family, some people weren't even permitted to go, but when you were permitted to go, you had to pay for it. You had to bring 2 marshals with you, and you had to pay for the marshals, and you had to be shackled during the funeral. Liz, you weren't allowed to leave prison when your dad died.
Right. First, it was my grandma in '97 when I got my time. You're correct. They were going to shackle me. They took me to the county to go transfer to the funeral, but they left me in the holding cell the whole time, and they never took me to her funeral. And then in 2010, my dad passed away, and because of my charges, I was considered high risk, and they weren't going to allow me to go because I had 37 and a half years, and I was in a maximum security unit. So the only way that I was able to speak to my father was through a phone call. And so in his deathbed, my sister would call the prison. The chaplain would put the phone on his ear, and he would hear my voice. So that was pretty much the last conversation I had with him, shortly right after he passed. So that was kind of my grieving point until I came home.
I don't think that people understand the extent to which we are stressed out in prison literally every hour. I know that I was constantly looking behind my back to see if a guard was looking at me and what I was doing wrong. I know that when I was put in solitary confinement, many of the people in solitary tried to commit suicide. And I know for myself that I thought if I didn't wake up the next day, that would be just fine with me. Each of us have different kinds of stress. Each of us hear different things. Ken, I know we spoke earlier today, and you talked about the day-to-day stress of being in the military prison.
Yeah, it was, it's so different. I imagine, I hope we all do get a chance to be face to face. We are face to face right now, but the emotion that you take from no matter how long we were, the military prison it's no holes barred. Rules are completely separate. They're children watching children. These are just young soldiers. Literally, they're not civilians. They're young soldiers doing that job, watching other soldiers who either have not done anything or have done something. It's an unbelievable dynamic. So then to walk in there as this old guy, that outranks the commander of the facility. She never spoke to me. She would run away from me. It was a challenge every day. I don't know about you guys. I can't handle metal on metal anymore. I can't sleep in the dark anymore. I have to have noise on all the time. And for my short time, those are triggers for me still today. And I can't imagine, the longer periods of time what we all go through. Every day, every single day.
Zahara, you thought a lot about suicide and solitary. You were there 5 years. Why don't you describe a little of what it's like to live in solitary for that length of time?
For me, it was definitely horrible because you didn't know if you were going to be able to go out and take a shower. You didn't know if sometimes they would even forget to feed you. So it was definitely difficult for me to be in solitary confinement, and it did weigh a lot on my mental health. I definitely thought about suicide quite often because one time I even said that I was going to do it. I had the sheet ready. I had planned it out, but I just didn't have the courage to go through with it at the time. But that being in solitary confinement has really weighed on my mental health a lot.
Okay, let's talk about returning home. For me, returning home was just as bad was worse than prison because I was homeless and penniless. And luckily I have found a place to live, but to this day I don't have a job. And I don't find a lot of support in helping me get a job. How do each of you feel about that?
Well, for me, when I came home, I had a job lined up, but when I came home, I was still on bond. So it wasn't like I was, coming out on parole or anything like that. So they still, all the background checks, they still show up as, a sex offender while my case was still pending. So it was hard to be able to kind of like just live life because you just never knew. Because the case was still pending, I couldn't make any decisions. I couldn't go on with life. I just went to report, found a job and worked, and just kind of waited. I was still in prison, but just in the free world, as we call it.
Ken, what was it like? You lost a house, if I'm correct.
Yeah, I lost everything. Obviously, I was, I had a 26-year career. I've lost my retirement, my VA benefits. I've lost everything. I lost my house. A little different, but not complicated. In the federal system, I was returned to the location I left my last duty station in Virginia. So Virginia was notified. Virginia tried to put me on the sex offender registration, even though there's no sex involved in my case, just the way that they read the federal charges. And Virginia, of course, has a terrible conservative nature anyway. But very luckily, because I entered the service from New York evaluated my case. They were one of the first states to evaluate my case. And they really did. They got pretty hot and heavy and told the Army to go screw themselves. There was nothing there that warranted that, I'll say it, that disgusting stigma label that, stays with you forever. So it was pretty lucky. But yeah, I lost everything. I'm back home in the house I grew up in. My parents were here. Luckily, they've been able to get another property. We couldn't live together. Adult children coming home. So I'm very, very fortunate. I know that. But it's been, I can't get a full-time job. I've been doing part-time work. The court martial, they call it dirty papers, bad papers, and you have to talk about that for that federal conviction. And I've put it out there and I talk about it. I try to tell people about the story, but I've actually been rejected, especially at my age and my education and blah, blah, blah. I couldn't even flip a burger here with the conviction. So it's been pretty difficult.
We're in the month of June and it's Pride. What are your feelings about whether you can celebrate Pride, and what are your feelings about whether the LGBT community is even aware that we're around and returning home and having issues? Zahara?
For me, when I first came out, Pride was my celebration of living in my truth. And Pride was a beautiful thing for me to do when I first came out. But at the prison, I think for me, writing so many different LGBT organizations while being incarcerated and telling them of my conditions of confinement and not receiving any type of help has somewhat changed my views on Pride. And I don't think I'm as proud as I was before coming to prison.
How about you, Liz?
For me, well, when I came out, we did reach out to the LGBTQ community to help us fight the case for our exoneration, because it was such a large publicity on us being lesbians. The media just took it from there. So we kind of connected with them for these last years, but it was because we were trying to, like I said, fight our case and get our exoneration. So the involvement, they didn't want to get involved with the child case. For one,
right?
As it is, they already, being gay is already difficult, and then secondly, a child case is even more, difficult to kind of live with, and the stigma of it, and then them still trying to get their rights and going. So it's been difficult. The support was there, and half support wasn't. So it was difficult for us all around.
Now, to wrap this up, in spite of our experiences, I think I'm probably more positive than I've ever been in my life, and more purposeful, and looking forward. And when I spoke to you, Ken, you were, the Democratic Party is getting behind you. So why don't you tell us what your future looks like?
Yeah, no, I've been pissed off, obviously. We probably all are, and I'm trying not to allow that anger to rule my life. And I've got a little mantra about walking away from fear to live. So I put my ass out there and running for the county legislature here, and my story has been so widespread. I was just in Rolling Stone, which is still kind of trippy when I say that, and very grateful that they picked up the case. The Democratic Party, I just won the endorsement, so I'm going forward with the county Democratic Party endorsement right now into petition season and actually be on the ballot. And I own it.
That's
I
great.
own my story. Yep.
That's great.
I'm not going to stop me. Yep.
And Zahara, I'm so proud of you, having spoken to you so much. You are going to be the lawyer for the group, but you now have a 3.8 GPA, or is it GP?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I have a 3.8 GPA. I'm currently studying for the LSAT as well.
And you're going to be our lawyer. Okay.
Yes.
And Liz, we have some exciting news from you too.
Yeah, I actually enrolled to the Animal College, so I'm trying to go for criminal justice.
So in spite of what happens to all of us, in one sentence, can you say how you feel about the future going forward? You got about 30 seconds apiece. How about you, Liz?
Oh, for me, I think that I have the fight within me, and I want to make change. And we just finished passing the HB 34 bill for interrogations and things here in San Antonio. And so, I mean, it's great. We have 32 states that are doing it. So I continue to push forward with that.
That's fantastic. Zahara?
For me, I'm very excited for the future. I just started a nonprofit here in Atlanta, Transgender Barriers Atlanta, and I'm going to help other trans women so they won't have to have any similar experiences that I've been through. So I'm very, very optimistic for the future.
Ken?
Walk away from fear and live. Don't let what they did to us, it's not going to stop. Obviously, this is the three of us. I can't believe I'm excited. What we've been through collectively, and we can show them that we can overcome this and still contribute.
You know, I find most people think that coming out of prison, we would be angry. And I find most of us who are formerly incarcerated LGBTQ people particularly positive. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, you still have to have that peace within you in order to live your life. You can't let everything bow you down and eat you up. You got to live and you got to enjoy it. And, we know how to appreciate life now. Everything was taken from us. So we appreciate the little things in life, and we have that peace within ourselves that we know that we're good people. We're just trying to help other people at the same time.
And I will say, to close this out, that I think what you said is perfect. I think that I went from being a person who was set to retire in 1995 and do some philanthropy work, and I lost everything. And I'm here today, and I feel better than I've ever felt. And seeing the three of you out there and knowing the work you're doing, I have confidence that it will be us, the most marginalized of communities, the formerly incarcerated LGBTQ people, that will be instrumental in making changes for people like us who are facing similar problems in their life or who have to face it. I want to thank the three of you, Ken, Liz, Zahara, for participating in the show. I really appreciate it, and I love you all.
Love you. Thank you.
Love you too. Thank you.
And I want to do this in person next time instead of Skype. And I think when they see us interact, that we are just remarkably happy for the stress that we're under. So again, thank you very much. And thanks to MNN for letting us do this show. Really appreciate it. And Zenaina Mendez.